With these four eminent and quite experienced professionals who have a very long career, we will explore this question, how to do much more. We also had invited the present Director General of Climate Action in Europe, Kurt van den Bergen, to come today. He cannot make it personally because, you know, people in Brussels, contrary to the stories, are quite busy. But he will deliver immediately a very strong introduction to our panel and to our discussion, and a very strong opinion. And to contextualize what he is doing, you have to know that Kurt is the Director General of Klima, which is one of the 27 DGs in Brussels, which is actually the most powerful supranational policymaker that we have in Europe, and he's heading it to work on what brings us together here, climate action and so forth. Kurt has a history in the European Commission. Before that, he was in the cabinet of President von der Leyen, and normally no one should know it, but I do know it. He was in charge of the Green Deal, so he was personally following all the actions, pushing for it, and so forth. Before that, he was director in DG Research, which was headed by Robert-Jan Smits, where he was co-author together with Robert-Jan in turning around the ship of funding topics to funding missions, and the biggest mission was indeed on climate action and the Green Deal. So altogether, if you are suspicious of a conspiracy and a complot, you're right, because I was working with them. So the three of us are in the same conspiracy that you can now publish on Instagram. So, as I said, Kurt could not come, but he delivered a very strong speech. So and then our speakers, our guests, will react to it. So let's first listen to the speech, and which deals with our hardcore topic, what to do and what to do more.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a true honor to address you today. The discussion you are about to have poses a stark question. Are we doing enough, or are we hiding in our corner? In the face of climate change, there is truly no place to hide. And at DG Klima in the European Commission, we are not in the habit of hiding or staying in our corner. By making the European Green Deal the #1 priority of the past 5 years, President von der Leyen has broken down long-established silos and made climate action everyone's business at the European Commission. While the political times have changed and continue changing, we still find climate policies at the heart of our political agenda. But where in the past we spoke more of climate policy serving the planet, we now see that these policies are critical contributors to our security and economic growth and independence. And we certainly cannot hide from the realities of climate change. The past decade has brought record heat and climate extremes. Just last year, 2024 became the first year with global temperatures averaging above 1.5 degrees. This should be a wake-up call if we still needed one. Emissions reductions should accelerate, and resilience and risk management are not optional, they are urgent. We have made important strides, but it is clear we are not yet doing enough. We owe it to all generations to do more and to do it faster. And the key lies in science. Science gives us the tools to understand and to act, to shape climate policies that are both ambitious and effective. Scientific evidence is what underpins all credible climate action. The IPCC has provided a vital foundation. Its assessments have informed the EU's targets for 2030 and 2050 and have shaped the European climate law. Our updated nationally determined contribution to the UN and a 2040 climate target soon to come will also be grounded in science. In short, without a scientific foundation, we would be flying blind or hiding from reality. Science also warns us of what happens if we delay. The costs of inaction are enormous. Even conservative models suggest a 7% drop in EU GDP by the end of the century without strong climate mitigation efforts. Some projections show global losses of up to 60% of GDP by 2100 if mitigation efforts are not accelerated. And these numbers do not reflect the human toll, lives lost, communities displaced, or the risk of crossing irreversible tipping points. So yes, we must act urgently and science must lead the way. But for all that we know, there is still so much more we must learn. We face critical gaps in knowledge, from how extreme weather patterns evolve to how societies can best adapt. This is where we need new research, faster. As policymakers, we need science that is not only deep, but also usable. We need clear, evidence-based answers on how to protect infrastructure, food systems, and public health. We need interdisciplinary insights, natural science to explain, applied sciences to solve, and social sciences to understand how people respond. Technology and innovation are essential. Breakthroughs in clean energy, carbon removal, and adaptation can accelerate our transition. But these breakthroughs only come from long-term investment in R&D. There are no shortcuts. We rely on persistence, vision, and funding. Crucially, climate change affects every sector of our society. That means we need expertise from every field: forestry, health, agriculture, engineering, economics, sociology, and so much more. Every discipline has a role. Every contribution counts. Policies succeed only when people act on them. That's why we also need behavioral and social sciences. What drives people to change? What makes policies stick? These are the questions we must ask, and we need answers that are grounded in evidence and real-world context. We must also ensure science reaches policymakers. Scientific knowledge has little impact if it stays in journals or conference rooms. We need excellent science communication that is clear, timely, and policy-ready. This is essential to bridge the gap between researchers and decision-makers. Let me give you a concrete example. Last year's European Climate Risk Assessment gave us a stark picture of Europe's vulnerabilities. It was a call to action, and we are answering it. We are now preparing a European climate adaptation plan to be adopted and presented in 2026. The plan will include 3 core goals. First, to clarify who owns which climate risks, using a shared reference scenario. Second, to embed resilience by design across all EU policies and investments. And thirdly, to empower citizens and businesses by giving them easy access to climate hazard data and solutions. We're also launching a second climate risk assessment to keep our knowledge current. Meanwhile, resilience is being mainstreamed across EU policy in our Preparedness Union strategy, our Competitiveness Compass, and also the new vision for agriculture and food. The Common Agricultural Policy, for example, should be reformed to support climate-resilient farming. We are and will be backing new crop techniques, better insurance tools, and more incentives for local adaptation. It's about helping farmers thrive, not just survive in a changing climate. Even our financial planning reflects climate science. In our upcoming EU budget, we will be using future-focused climate scenarios to guide investment. We are working to future-proof every euro we spend against climate risk. None of this, ladies and gentlemen, would be possible without the research community. Your work provides the bedrock for every one of our actions. That is why the EU remains a top global funder of climate research. Through the brand new Choose Europe initiative, we are investing in researchers, labs, and innovation, because today's science is tomorrow's breakthrough. So, are we doing enough? We have come far, but we are not there yet. Let us step out of our silos across disciplines and generations and rise to this challenge. Science gives us the tools. The promise of a clean and healthy future gives us the reason. We must act together, and we will. Thank you very much for your very, very valuable work.
So for those who think that Brussels is stuffed with boring bureaucrats, you heard the opposite. Huh? So, because this is one of the most powerful civil servants today in what brings us together. So the message of Kurt was very clear. We need there are gaps. We need more about breakthroughs. We need more actionable science. We need to speak up, etc. So what do we do about it? There are enormous holes to fill. There is an enormous acceleration to be done. And now I invite the panel to react on it. So I would like to start first with also one of these atypical bureaucrats of Brussels, Robert-Jan Smits, who then became the president of the Technical University of Eindhoven. So Robert-Jan, and the same question for everyone sitting here. Listening to Kurt, where should we put our eggs? How can we accelerate the machine? And what is your personal contribution there? Robert-Jan, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is Kurt, as we know him, extremely passionate and very eloquent. It's a first-class speech, and he really puts his finger on a lot of things which are necessary. The knowledge gaps, which there are still. The job of science is never finished. And so we need to keep on working to address these knowledge gaps. He mentioned the interdisciplinarity, and I think besides the sociology, I would also very much include the finance more than ever before, because once it becomes a problem of the finance ministers, they will act and they will take measures. So from that point of view, I think it's a brilliant speech. There's one thing which we have not discussed, and we have to be really taken into consideration. At the moment, if you also look at the agenda of the European Commission, although the climate targets are still being mentioned specifically, climate neutrality in 2050, Fit for 55 in 2030, you see very clearly that there has become quite some opposition, notably from the private sector, on the Green Deal, that they were completely bogged down with all kinds of regulations and all kinds of acts and directives. And this has led to a situation that the Clean Deal is not talked about. It's at the moment called the Clean Industrial Deal. So I think this is something we have to really take into consideration when I hear him talk about new legislation, new measures, new procedures. This is where we have to be extremely careful, because although we all want to move forward, we have to avoid the situation that people are completely bogged down by all kinds of rules which are being imposed top-down and don't have, therefore, the buy-in anymore. I recently saw a barometer about what keeps people busy at the moment. 2 years ago, and 3 years ago, and last year, it was climate change. Now it is security, it's safety, it's resilience. So let's make sure that we keep climate change high on the agenda, but let's also make sure we get the buy-in from all parties, also the private sector, because else we're not going to make it.
Yeah. Very clear, Johan. Robert-Jan, sorry. Thank you very much for that. I would like to give the floor to Inge as an active scientist still from the European Space Agency, one of the biggest public partnerships that we have in Europe on science and innovation, if you want, but also with a very significant contribution to what brings us together. Inge has also been very active in the IPPC and so forth. Your take on this?
Yeah. So if we look at it from the ESA side, so we're European Space Agency, as you know, so the space sector is not very known for doing great for climate in the first place, because with all the fuels we burn just launching satellites, that's not the first thing to do. But of course it brings a lot of data. And what we've been seeing is that there's so much data, and was brought up also before here the last days, is that not always all the data is best used. So what we do see is that the data exploitation of all these satellites, and I think everybody of you must have seen one of the launches. I hope it was the launch of an ESA satellite, not the ones from Musk. But anyway, so you see that there's a lot of satellites out there, and when I started working in space, there were like only a tenth of it. So it's really exponential, and also exponential data. So coming back to what Kurt was saying, do we need more data? Do we do more? Well, we can always launch more satellites. We need continuity. But the question is also, do we use the data at the best? So for that sense, I really think there's a lot to be done. And so you were asking from a personal engagement. So I've been, before being at ESA, I was 15 years at the other side, so at the end user side, at the UN. And basically what I've seen is also that the link there, as Kurt was mentioning with the policies, is really something that's missing. So Earth observation, so the satellites, of course it's cool to have them and to see them and they have great pictures, but actually it's real data, it's indicators, it's a lot of tools that can be used into this policy making, but also in the policy impact following up. And so what's now one of really also my personal commitments, so I'm leading the Green Solutions division, is really to make sure that that data is integrated in this policy making. So for that we're really starting, and unfortunately we say starting because we're not far yet, to really show policymakers what Earth observation can bring. We heard about these silos. Unfortunately, a lot of the Earth observation communities also do not consider, for example, in situ data. So we really have to bridge the gaps between the different communities, and that's something we're really very strongly committed to. Talking also, Robert, on the security, it's true, we have to keep climate high, and by showing by satellite data, because it's very hard to do in situ, we really can show all the terrible impacts of climate change, so that's also a very big thing. And then lastly also, well, times are changing. We heard a lot about AI, and unfortunately we also have now also a lot of deep fake Earth observation data. So as ESA, for example, we really do have also the mandate to keep that data and veracity. We heard yesterday about trust in science. So that's also something, as you could say, a certifier of data. It's a very big task, and I think it's something of ESA really to step up, especially now if we see what happens to our American counterpart NASA. So that's also something we really look into. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Inge. So indeed, that's actually an interesting point also that we have been discussing. So to take on board this deep fake danger for the science that we do, because that's actually what I tried to say in my introduction. So there is those who do not want things to go forward and to keep business as usual are, of course, using this. So we must really be very alert to that, just as the point raised by Robert Jan, that we must not lose industry, otherwise we will not make it, is very pertinent. So these are already some clear messages. Salvatore, you are the CEO of the International Science Council, which is the largest and most widely active international organization of science organizations actually in the world, and very, very active and supportive also for the Planet Prize on this mission-driven science. So from your point of view as an international player who has to balance between the political game and the scientific game, so what is your take on the message of Kurt? So please, I need science, speed it up, give it to me.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, very happy to be here. And I think the message by Kurt demonstrates that what I may call the policy enabling framework for science is really growing in importance. On the one hand, science does not need policy to exist, but if you do have a strong policy demand, then science can respond. The first transformation that we need to undergo, and in fact that transformation has happened already, is in fact by the scientists themselves. When I started working internationally almost 35 years ago, those colleagues of mine who decided to stay in science, whereas I was more interested in the science policy interface, they asked me and themselves, why should we worry about the contribution of science to policy? And nowadays, and I see a lot of young people in the room, nowadays notions such as actionable knowledge generated through scientific research, that notion is now sort of a mainstream. So I think scientists have undergone that transformation. But scientists operate they don't operate in a vacuum. First of all, they operate in the context of science systems. And I'm not sure that science systems have completed that transformation. For example, with all due respect, does research funding really walk the talk when it comes to inter- and transdisciplinary science? Most of research funding continues to be based on single disciplines. Another important, this is why I was looking at you, is the way the performance of universities, the way in which universities assess the performance of scientific researchers, still based on scientific production, as it should be, but I think we also need to value the contribution of scientific endeavors to policy making, evidence-based policy making. So I think that message by Kurt, to kind of cut a long story short, is a very strong, if you like, empowerment message to science, and a call to scientists for scientists really to deliver when it comes to knowledge which is actionable and contributing to sustainable solutions.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. That's indeed one of the key issues to take forward if we want to be more successful. Johan, same question to you. You can also react to what you heard from your colleagues. So how can we together design a system that is faster, quicker?
Yeah, thanks. And so I'll be prepare you that I'll be giving you a little bit of a sour scientific answer to Kurt's talk, and to just explain that first, Kurt van den Berg is certainly probably the most talented senior civil servant in the world on supporting climate action. And he leads the climate action work in the world's most science-aligned region on climate action in the world, the European Union. There's nothing close to the European Union across the entire world. Despite that, I'm critical. And the reason for this is that Kurt van den Berg claims very clearly that policy needs to follow science. But the policy that the European Union has adopted, the Fit for 55 and the carbon neutrality by 2045, is based on the IPCC 6th assessment, which is based on data which had a dead kind of a closing line in 2017, 2018. It's published in 2019, coming out 2020. And we know now that the remaining global carbon budget is down to 150 billion tons of carbon dioxide. At the time of the policy in European Union, it was more than 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So it was enough for the world's richest countries to come to zero by 2050 and cut emissions by half by 2030. We even published science at the time on this, calling this the carbon law. But today that's not enough. It's not enough for any country in the world to be cutting emissions by half by 2030, because we are now in 2025. Science showed clearly that we had to bend the global curve of emissions by 2020 latest. We're still increasing emissions. So now we have to cut emissions by half by 2030, which is a pace of over 10% global emission reductions per year, to be able to have a 50% chance of holding the Paris range that we've all signed on to in a legally binding Paris Agreement. So therefore, the most ambitious climate policy in the world is not science-aligned. It's the best we have, but it's not science-aligned. And I think one has to be very clear about this. And to add a little bit more salt in the wound, the budgets that guide the policy in any country in the world is actually factoring in the assumption that we'll be magically very, very capable of scaling carbon dioxide removal technologies in the second half of this century. So we're actually kicking down the can in the road and giving you, the younger generation, the responsibility to clean up from 2050 onwards our inability to clean up today. If you do not do that, let's assume that we do not have negative emissions from 2050 onwards. then, dear friends, the pathway becomes even steeper. So the climate policy in Europe, cutting emissions by half by 2030, net zero by 2050, exists only because we're assuming we'll be able to scale carbon dioxide removal technologies at over 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year from 2050 onwards. So that is factored in to have an orderly phase out of fossil fuels. I'm not saying that I'm supporting him full-heartedly. And Ursula von der Leyen is fantastic. And Wopke Hoekstra is probably the best commissioner we have. And we should be really proud. But at the same time, I think we have to be very honest with each other to say that, look, we have a problem here. We are in the most ambitious efforts actually lagging way behind what even the fundamental science says. You'll hear that very soon when the update of the Global Carbon Project is done with the UNEP Gap report, that, we are not aligning with science. So that's just a little reminder, kind of a sobering reminder perhaps, of why on the one hand we should really support the European Union's efforts. Kurt is fantastic, but on the other hand we also need to keep the pressure up on our political leadership. Just finally to say that where is there hope in this? Because we've just lost the US, hopefully just temporarily. The European Union leads the world. We know actually scientifically that if we could get the 4 largest players on board, we could tip the logic in the whole world: the European Union, the US, China, and India. Well, now we've temporarily lost the US, so now I think the European Union should really focus on China and India. That's the task, to get these 3 large players. The 4 of them are the largest emitters in the world, the 4 largest economies in the world. Get those 3 on board and we can tip the logic. Again, this David and Goliath logic, large enough minorities to tip over the logic in the majorities. And why can this work today? Well, it's because we have Mark Carney as the Prime Minister in Canada. He was one of the most important climate champions for finance in the world. And then we have in Australia, the government of Albanese, which also is entirely climate aligned. So I think there's something quite interesting right now that I would really have hoped that Kurt could have emphasized a little bit more, that now is the time to push the dial very hard. And finally, we have President Lula, who really wants to make an imprint with COP30. So I think there's something quite interesting here that we could play with over the next couple of few months to really bend the curve of emissions, and Europe must lead on this task.
So thank you very much, Johan, and thankfully so that in our part of the world, this is exactly what we need to do, to be critical. Huh? But unfortunately, Kurt sent me a message that your next grant is scrapped now, so I'm... but I'm sure he will accept your critique and see what he can do about it. But let's take that point, and then, indeed, Johan, if the other panelists agree, let's take that point of a new coalition and what we can do to support that too. Robert-Jan, you wanted to react to it?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right from a scientific point of view. Let's be clear about that. And that's why I think also the Plenary Prize, which France just launched, is so important, to keep it on the agenda and talk about it. But at the same time, you see what's going on. There are governments across the world, also in Europe, who deny that there is a climate problem. We have an industry, and I mentioned it, which is being critical, more and more critical, on all these rules and regulations which are bogging down and lead to problems. Look at Germany. The Energiewende has cost the German industry an enormous amount of activity. There has been in Germany in 2022 a disinvestment of 200 billion, means that German companies were investing outside, and there was only in return of that 12 billion of inward investment. So in other words, the industry is at the moment more and more critical. So we have the politicians, which are a large number of them, and you mentioned some good ones, which are critical. Industry is critical because they are bogged down. And let's be clear, the energy price in Europe for industry is 3 to 4 times higher than in the United States and in China. In Ludwigshafen, Germany, 2 out of the 7 BASF factories are closed down. I mean, so we have a real problem. Not having industry on board, governments being more and more critical, and then also the citizen getting more concerned about security, war, instead of climate change. So yes, science should continue doing the work, and you should keep on telling the thing you just told, and we should on promoting indeed the prize and the award which Fransje set up. But at the same time, I'm very worried about what I see happening with regard to ownership in society, and that ownership is decreasing, is not increasing, despite whatever we come up with facts.
Thank you very much, Robert-Jan. Indeed, important message how to ensure that we keep having this ownership. And Salvatore, you also wanted to react. And then
yes. So in my first intervention, I said the scientists are ready, but of course, scientists are not naive, and science does operate in a context, and the context is not only about within which science operates. It's not only about the mismatch between science and policy that Johan referred to, but unfortunately, right now, it also is a context of populism. It is a context when the discourse related to open science, which is a very dear cause to the Frontiers Foundation and to the ISC as well, is changing, is switching from as open as possible and as closed as necessary for security reasons, etc. So in that context, science and scientists are faced with a dilemma kind of question. Do we get our hands wet? Do we engage? Do we get our hands dirty? And engage with multiple stakeholders, policymakers, funders, and why not? I mean, I'm not saying we should engage with populists, but trying to understand the psychology of populism, understanding to which extent perceptions influence behaviors and decisions. That's very, very important. So that leads to the fact that maybe there is a need, the time has come to rewrite the contract between science and society. Science is part of society, so it may sound pointless that science should get into a contract with society, but I think it's a provocative statement from me, that is to say that science cannot afford anymore being in an ivory tower. We did hear earlier about science integrity. Science has to continue operating in a way which is independent, free, and stick to science integrity and other fundamental principles of science, but also engage so that we can fill those gaps as promptly as possible.
Thank you, Salvatore. Indeed, this new contract and how to bring in the work on the planetary boundaries is, of course, a very promising avenue to reflect on. Inge, you wanted to react as well?
Yeah, to react to what you were saying, indeed. So if you bring in climate, and especially in the governments what we have now in Europe with a lot of very right-wing, unfortunately climate is seen as a left-wing issue, which is still very strange. And if you come up with it, and especially with the bad news, yeah, you're like a prophet from the left wing, you're a communist, and you should shut up. So basically what we really have to turn on, and I think this is also one of the messages to the scientists, unfortunately, it is like you say, John, it's not looking good. But it's true that, and then talking to the psychology of people, there's a certain level you can get. It's like with the images of Gaza at a certain point. I don't want to say you come numb for it, but it's true. There's like a saturation of all these negative. So we need to find another narrative to talk and to invest also to get the people on board and to really have them on board with what we're saying. Science is part of society, but now if you come up, and I experienced myself, I was a bit in the media in Belgium last year, also due to these IPCC reports, which are not happy news, and you get everything out over you that you're really a communist thinking about yourself, and that it's not what people want. So we have to get these people engaged on another way. And on a personal, you were also asking on a personal level. So one of the things I did is a few years ago, I started an NGO, which is called Be the Change, in which I showed with one example, positive examples, which shows impact. And I think this prize is even way much more ahead with this, because it shows individual research parts, which really shows an impact. Like the last speaker we had, it shows that, of course, it's not good like it is now, but we can change. And then you show options. And by showing options, people, because hope is also an action. It's not a passive word. So we have to show that there are options. And I think there, one of the messages I would give to scientists, and so my division is called Green Solutions, and my website is EO for Society. So basically, And talking about the ivory tower, and also when I was not in ESA yet, I thought there was too often a lot of amazing solutions, but without co-development, co-design, which I also heard in other sessions, with the end users, so that they feel part of it and not scientific solutions brought up who then look for users to take it up. So really another paradigm shift that we really work together. And actually ESA is really committed to do so, because now we started the whole integrated policy expert scheme. So where there's policy, or everybody working in civil servants come and work a few years with us, hand in hand with the engineers who develop these indicators based on Earth observation data, because by just talking in a symposium, you're not going to get to the solution. So really hand in hand working and talking each other's language, because that's not happening now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what really puzzles me about this communist thing is that the most polluting countries in the world are the former communist or the present communist one. If you go to Russia, or you go to the satellite states that are independent now, I mean, you look around and the respect for nature and environment and biodiversity is close to zero, was close to zero. So I don't understand also where this communist thing comes from. Also for another reason, I'm just deviating from my script now, but for you to maybe over dinner, is that if you look at it politically, the origin of conservation and let's keep nature as it is actually from conservative parties in the 17th and 18th century. They were the first that defended us, and somewhere this became a left topic, which is very funny. Also, well, a left stigma, but also because what we are all saying, and in particular the people like you are on the forefront of it, is that what we advocate is the industry of the future. So there is absolutely no agenda of leftist, if you look at it from that perspective in there. But of course, it's a very powerful argument in the bad information that we get, in the misinformation in the campaigns and so on. But okay, I'm getting carried away now by my own...
Jean-Claude, I think you're right.
Yes, Robert-Jan.
The thing which the presentation we have heard are fantastic. What is something which could convince a lot of people, notably the private sector, is of course the business case. I mean, there are two elements which will convince, I think, society as a whole that we need to continue. And we can talk whatever we want, but it's at a given time society and politicians which need to indeed realize that it's time for action. That can only be done by pointing out what you did about the costs, what it costs to the GDP if we continue like this. But on the other hand, to turn it into a business. From the moment that wind farms can run without subsidies, and we have hydrogen as a kind of a new business model, and we can develop storage for electricity, and there will be startups and companies that grow. At the moment that happens, then there is a business case. And I think that's something also, perhaps in the context of the Future Prize, we should think, what is the business case of these beautiful science which is being developed? Because then there will be a take-up. If there's no business case, it will be very difficult to take it up. Yeah, not talking about scientific support to policy making, talk about concrete solutions.
Yes. Really, we have to focus on opportunities. Johan, you wanted to react to this?
Well, I mean, I fully agree with the assessment that, and I would even go as far to say that one of the biggest failures of the past 50 years is that we've allowed environmental science, sustainability science, and even climate science, to a lesser extent, but to a significant extent, to fall into the camp of environmentalism. And therefore, the solution has been to protect, and that it's about willingness to pay, and it's therefore largely about sacrifice, and that's where the degrowth agenda comes up, and that's where it's used and misused as an argument to say that, well, that is a suggestion of us going backwards. We want to develop ourselves going forward. But I would quite strongly argue that that narrative is changing, and it's changing very rapidly along the lines that you just pointed out. And Europe is a very good example here, where the transition away from fossil fuels today is actually not only an environmental policy agenda, it is really fundamentally about competitiveness, it's about jobs, it's about security, and it's about health. And this is coming through more and more, and what is happening in Europe with the car industry and the heavy truck industry is a race for the existence of a car and heavy truck industry in Europe, not about the planet, primarily. And this is what we see in Germany to a very significant extent. And therefore, I think we have a golden opportunity to do exactly what you're suggesting, that it is to take the risk assessments and translate them to the economic impacts of unsustainable pathways, but also the huge opportunities of investing towards a competitive, clean, healthy, secure future. And Kurt van den Berg is one of the champions on resilience. And resilience is really about more robust societies to deal with stress. And that is also something that is a completely different story than this question of just saying humans are bad, nature is good, let's put a fence, which has been the conventional way of addressing the trajectories. But just to refer back to Kurt again, he did refer to really important research showing that we are facing very soon significant GDP declines because of unsustainable impacts. We did not have that before. Remember that when Nick Stern produced his first Stern review in 2006, which was the breakthrough, he showed, like 4 or 5% of potential impacts on GDP if we continued emitting greenhouse gases, and a 1% of GDP to solve the problem. That did not bite enough. Now, 20 years later, the latest science shows double-digit numbers, and Kurt was referring to 2100. I can tell you that the latest really conventional basic climate economics shows a 19% decline in income levels by 2050 if we continue as today. Over the next 25 years, almost 20% reductions in global income levels just because of productivity decline, heat impacts, and precipitation extremes. So they're not even taking any tipping points into account. It's not about biodiversity. It's really just the basic fundamentals with damage functions that we're simply sitting on today. So it's very likely an underestimate. This is the card we need to play, of course. You're absolutely right. The risk card in economic terms, but also the opportunity pathway. And we know today, if we put on the sustainability glasses, if you put on the planetary boundary glasses, you have to innovate even faster, and it's very likely that you'll therefore be successful because we have so much evidence that the solutions exist. Admittedly, though, to close, we are at this transition phase. I think that is the dilemma. We're in the middle of a phase away from a fossil fuel-driven economy to a clean, circular economy, and it takes time to transition. 150 years, you don't just shut it down overnight. So that's where we are. And this is why it's getting difficult in Germany, for example. Germany is totally committed to decarbonize. The Energy Commission, the Energiewende, they are on track, but it's proving to be more difficult than they thought because it is a transition. It's a whole systems transition away from gas and coal. Germany still has 30% of electricity produced from coal. I mean, come on. Crazy. I mean, don't quote me here, please. I'm working in Germany. But it just shows, how can you still be so backwards? And that has to change, and it is changing, and the policy is there to change it. But it's a bumpy ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Johan, you're absolutely right there. But it is again our role, I think, to show that it is possible. If we don't do it, it will not come from the trolls of the internet. So it's really, I think, and it's a call to all of you to do it. I suggest, well, I don't suggest, we have to wind down. We have exactly 2 minutes to wind down. So you have you can maximum 1 minute to make your final statement on this, bearing in mind that we have only one generation.
Thank you. I think I can do it in 45 seconds. Indeed, we can succeed. There is one boundary, planetary boundary, that shows success, ozone depletion. And indeed, why? Why? Because all the ingredients were there. The science was mature, alternative technologies were available. There was a market for those alternative technologies. A UN protocol was formulated and agreed upon in an 18-month record time, a multi-billion-dollar established. And you can see the result in the slides that were shown earlier today. That's a boundary that is doing quite well. And finally, I wanted to say, I think Johan planted an important seed today. He said that the narrative around the global commons is changing, has to change. We need to redefine the global commons. And if you if we redefine the global commons, that notion of the way that he did, then it will be very, very appealing for investors, not just for scientists, for multilateral banks, and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. Robert-Jan.
Well, my clear message is, as I said, the job of science is never finished, and therefore keep up the good work and be persistent, even if within society or the private sector politicians there's a backlash. I mean, walk the talk, stay the course, and ultimately I hope we'll be able to convince society, convince the private sector, convince politicians that this is the best way forward. But it means also, and we discussed it earlier on the side, that scientists have to get out of their silos and really present what they have to offer, think about the business case, reach out to society. I think that's more than ever necessary in order to get everyone on board. Because it would not be good if scientists are way ahead of the troops, and that is never good. You have to stay connected to society and show the impact of your work to society.
Absolutely, like what we did with COVID, huh? Johan.
Now, just to close by saying, isn't it quite fantastic, actually quite incredible, that so many green solutions are starting to scale despite the fact that the planet-damaging solutions are totally subsidized by the planet. And they have an unfair competition. And not only that, you have another $7 trillion of US dollars per year of direct subsidies from unsustainable policymaking. And despite that, we're winning. Despite that, you see these exponential curves of green solutions across the food system, the transport system, the building sector, circular consumption production systems, green urban areas. So there's no doubt in my mind that we are in the beginning of the end of the unsustainable pathway to deliver human well-being, prosperity, and equity. It's just that we need to do a few teeny-weeny corrections in the economy to succeed.
Thank you, Johan. Inge.
Yes, and then to end, so we're talking about the planet's going wrong, so the space sector also have another issue, that we have the burden that we also see that space is getting crowded and full of debris. So that's another one, so we're really trying, at least from ESA, we have a space debris program in which we want to try at least to clean up, if one day we have to go to Mars and live there, that at least we get there safe. So also there, we really have to take care of that, and that's a very big point for the space sector. But then for me also, and it's also something we didn't touch upon, unfortunately we didn't have time enough, but getting out of the silos is one, but also get out of the silos of the countries. So we're talking about partnerships. We heard also yesterday about Africa, we have the other continents, so Europe also had a leading role in showing the way for the other continents, especially in sustainable development, and I think this is also a role we should take. We hear about social injustice because the climate change is not happening where the biggest polluters are. So this is also something that really should be taken up. And hopefully, that's one of the missions we have, is with the Earth observation data, which is paid by all of you. So the taxpayer pays every year €15 to ESA. So basically to use that and to make better use also in these policies. So to better use of the data, especially the one which is there already.
Thank you, Inge. So before we close down, I have a message for all of you, so that normally there was Q&A. We don't have time anymore. Normally we can have this fantastic panel talking for 3 hours. There's no time for that. But we will publish the text of Kurt's speech as a short contribution in the Frontiers Policy Labs, which is one of our publications where we foster this kind of discussion between science and policy. We will use the notes here of this afternoon to enrich that piece, to launch some provocative statements. And all of you who could not now have no time for you to raise a question, you're all invited to contribute maximum 1.5 page, but very cleverly thought of, and no shooting from the hip. So you will get all that in your mails later on. You're invited to participate in that discussion. So I would now like to close this communist discussion by 4 communists and ask my